So I've talked to a couple different people about this one, and I'm going to have to be very careful about how I say this so I don't get a target on my back. One, this is not medical advice. Two, I am not responsible for your choices. Okay. So I've been discussing because of the past year that I've been trying to work within the system to try to help them do better, at least by me and by people like me. And the system has time and again proven that they don't want to do better. They want to pacify you and then pretend like what they're doing is okay. Okay. Because a lot of the referrals that I've had for months now. Never once did I get a proper provider for those referrals or to meet my needs. So it's obvious to me that the healthcare system is collapsing, but not because there isn't money available for the healthcare system, but because they put profit over people. And nurses and doctors seem to believe that it's okay to do that and believe that only their lack of extra employees it's what's been causing the problem. It's not the only thing that's been causing the problem. This has been a problem for since I found paperwork of my grandmother on my dad's side. She went through some of the same things that I've been going through. And in the paperwork, it shows. So obviously, this has been going for at least a minimum of 60 years, if not 100, possibly since our modern healthcare system came to exist. So it tells me that the healthcare system is working exactly the way it was intended. And this is another way to prove that it's late stage capitalism. So how can you kill two birds with one stone and end the shutdown plus maybe possibly get big pharma out of business or at least lower their business and have holistic care be one of the alternative cares, not just holistic care, but alternative care options be not only affordable but also everyone have access to them, because essentially right now what's happening is that only certain people have access to certain things if you can pay for them. Because one person that I spoke to today, they're like, well, you could always go to Mexico. Motherfucker, yes, I could always go to Mexico to get that care. I'm privileged enough to be able to do that because I've had help, but now I can't afford it. I don't have that help anymore. I don't have the resource, the financial resource that I had a year ago that was helping me with those alternative treatments. Okay. All of this pressure that we put on family members to be able to cover those extra costs when a person gets sick. I remember when my cousin had cancer, it was ridiculous the amount of costs that it was out of pocket for her to get the alternative treatments that she was searching. You can't blame the treatments that she got on the fact that she didn't get better. She just waited a little too long. However, when we sit here lying to ourselves, pretending like we don't have any power in this. I went through the ombudsman, I went through putting all these complaints, but essentially, what they are allowing these companies to do is to be able to process everything internally, which leaves us at the mercy of them. You are literally asking us to go back to the same providers or to the providers that these companies offer and get treated in the same ways. And like I've mentioned in other posts, um, if I get another rheumatologist through the insurance that I had, this would be my third or fourth rheumatologist in a year. If I go and get another cardiologist, it would be my third or fourth in 2 years. If I go through primary care, this would be my third or fourth in a year or 2 years, a little, yeah, something like that. So basically, you're asking me to keep putting myself at the mercy of people who are biased and who have no intention of keeping up the maintenance of chronic illness if the treatment is not profitable. What is the word? Be able to be coded in a way that your system can understand it, or basically offered by durable medical equipment or the current big pharma initiative that we've been stuck with since big pharma started to realize there was profit in healthcare. There shouldn't be profit in healthcare. The moment you take that away, there's no reason to keep people sick. There's no reason to give them experimental medication that doesn't work. Because essentially, with my neurologist, even though he was a great neurologist, he kept switching my medications when there was no real indication to switch my medication, when sometimes one was working. Essentially, the influx of migraines had other reasons, and they're starting to come back now that I'm off, like almost completely off of CBD and THC, like y'all asked me to, which is actually making my POT symptoms worse, and it's making my dysautonomia symptoms worse. It's also making my migraines worse and my gut worse. I started vomiting again today. So, honestly, you guys obviously don't want us to be well, because there's an alternative medication, which is marijuana, that you don't want to use because of the fact that you don't consider it medicine, because you haven't done enough research to see how it can affect the body or not affect the body, even though our ancestors used that as medicine for a very long time, etc. Another thing, you're experimenting with ketamine because you can actually um, patent ketamine. However, ketamine is just a retarded imitation of psilocybin. You could be giving patients microdoses of psilocybin, which are known to help people with arthritis, joint issues, muscular issues, ligamental issues, and things like that, because it reduces the nervous system pain by creating new neural pathways. Okay, that is what the trip is. But if you microdose it, it's minimal. So you're just creating new neural pathways to find different ways to work with the body. But it gets expensive if you're paying out of pockets. And it also is detrimental to your health if you're getting a synthetic version of psilocybin, which is what a lot of people are starting to do. Essentially, every time we start chemically messing with medicines, including marijuana, in order to patent a strain of marijuana, companies will mess and add so that the strain will be more potent, when in fact that takes away from the medicine. It's creating escapism, and it's taking away from the medicine. Instead of taking the 2 puffs, 3 puffs that you need to remove your pain, you're now smoking a whole joint so that you can just escape from the reality of what your body feels like. Essentially, taking the edge off should be your goal, not removing pain entirely, because in order to understand the limitations of our body, we need to be able to feel our chronic pain even a little bit so that we know when we're overdoing it. Learning to live with these things is the only hope for a chronically ill person, because numbing it, eventually the medications stop working. And you can't say you have not encountered at least 5 out of 10 patients whom either had to up the dose of their medication or switch the medication because it was no longer working, because the body gets used to those medications. Psilocybin is a great option because you don't have to take it all the time. And it's not just effective for that, it's proven to be very effective for people struggling with certain neurological disorders, and especially for overstimulation in neurodivergent people. Okay, so instead of studying that, you give neurodivergent persons stimulants to be able to address their ADHD. You give people with sensitive nervous systems anxiety medication to be able to soothe their nervous systems, instead of trying to understand that the lack of accommodation in the world that wasn't created for us is exactly what's causing the overstimulation, because you don't want to change the way capitalism has created this. So essentially, the only way that I can see profit being removed from healthcare, and also this government shutdown ending like that, is if people disenroll from big corporate medical insurances all at once. There has to be a complete disenrollment from the majority of people so that they see that we're serious about our healthcare costs. Otherwise, they're going to keep upping the amount that private insurance people pay for to be able to cover the cost of other things. And essentially, they're not covering the costs like they're supposed to of all of the Medi-Cal recipients and Medicare recipients, because it's not just our paychecks that go into those funds. It's supposed to also be some of that private insurance money that is supposed to be going to running these hospitals more smoothly. But instead of hiring more nurses so that there's less nurse burnout, or instead of hiring doctors who actually take their job seriously, they keep hiring people who keep the status quo and actually incentivize this kind of behavior and incentivize, whether they want to admit it or not, the use of pharmaceuticals, not taking the patient into consideration. Because even though some of those things are taking the patient into consideration, a lot of what is done to women, because you haven't studied women enough, is experimental from the moment you start giving them medications, because you have no idea what the fuck you're doing when it comes to female hormones, or how to address them, or how to balance them out. Just recently, a retired doctor tried to tell me that, have I considered taking alternative forms of hormone? No, not chemical ones, but yes, herbal ones that balance out our hormones. There are herbs that will help you balance out your hormones. It's why most of my tests come out normal, because the herbs keep my system running. It doesn't mean it takes all of the fucking symptoms away. It just limits the damage that these symptoms are doing to the body, because essentially chronic pain damages your nervous system to the point of either making it extremely sensitive or dulling it out and causing neuropathy, and I believe dysautonomia. And I mean extreme bouts of dysautonomia, because some people get to the point where they're even having seizures and shit from those things. For a long time, they did tests on me to see that if I was having seizures or not, because how my body was responding to the amount of stress that these doctors were putting me through. Because it wasn't just the stress of my family house, which doctors are happy to point at that, but they don't take into consideration or take accountability for the amount of stress that they put me through, not just with their testing that was meant to be cruel so that I would give up. Because even when I went to the dermatologist a few months ago, the first suggestion was to cut out the lumps that I have in my leg. The next time I went in, because the pain was starting to come, and I believe the pain is also because they're reversing my neuropathy. So all of the pain I didn't feel before, I'm starting to feel again. And so essentially the next time they did an ultrasound, his initial response was not to offer that ultrasound. His initial response was to offer cutting into me. And the thing and the problem with that is the fact that when I was willing to do it just to prove his point, to prove mine and prove that his point was in like off, he that's when they sent me to get the ultrasound, because they want to see that you're serious. And it really pisses me off, because we're already burnt out from fighting so much. Each one of these appointments drains me to the point of not wanting to interact with people for days. And then they call that depression. But that's not depression. That's exhaustion from the bullshit that you guys are putting us through. So essentially, the only solution that I see to both of these problems and the ignorance of the big orange idiot is to disenroll as many people as can possibly safely do without putting their health at risk, because essentially nobody should be calling for anyone to put themselves at risk. However, it really does matter about coming together on this one, because even though you believe that other people might be taking advantage of that system, immigrants are not taking advantage of that system. It's the fucking rich people that are, because their health care is provided for fully. And a lot of these people are getting cuts and things like that that we do not get, because they're not paying the equivalency of the money that they are making. They're not even paying the equivalency of taxes on the money that they are making. They find loopholes for everything to be able to draw that money inward and not actually pay into these systems. So the fact that they're dictating whether these systems should exist or not, while our politicians sit there and do nothing, because even our own politicians don't take us seriously, it's time that we find a way. And the only way is, I think, to boycott the entire medical system, so that a universal medical system is created, so that the color of your skin doesn't dictate the care that you receive, so that the town that you live in doesn't dictate the care that you receive, so that your poverty line doesn't dictate whether you get help before you're broke and dying, rather than getting help when you need it. Because essentially, even insured people will often avoid going to the doctor because of the cost that it will be. So just keep that in mind, because a lot of the people, you guys are all complaining about what's going on with SNAP and all that shit, but a lot of the people who are on SNAP because of the fact that they're living below that poverty line, despite having multiple jobs. And a lot of the people who stay impoverished are disabled. A lot of, I've met so many disabled people in the last couple months that either were living in their car for years because they could not afford rent, or they are living in their car because they can't afford rent, because they have to choose between getting proper medical care that may or may not be covered by their insurance, or being able to live indoors. And don't even get me started on how housing is a right and everybody should have a right to housing, because that's a whole nother story that should really be considered in the real estate department. But I'm not going to go off on that tangent. I am just saying that we can kill two birds with one boycott. And it doesn't even have to be a long-term boycott, just enough to get them back into the voting thing to fix the stupid, big, beautiful bill that is a fucking hellhole for anybody who approves and pushes that through. And anybody, everybody. Because this government is essentially guaranteeing a very large national medical debt if insurances get cost. The way it was before, our medical debt will rise, because essentially there is still profit in keeping us sick, because they get bailouts for that fucking debt. And there's still pharmaceutical companies and these insurance companies are not the ones losing the money, honey. They're also not the ones giving the money back or placing it where it needs to be. And the government should either hold them accountable or stop giving them incentives and bailouts. It's such a simple solution. I'm surprised that none of you have thought about it. I love you and have a good night.